I'd been working maintenance for a few years by the time I got done with college, mostly just garage pickups and stuff like that. At the apartment complexes, my dad was in charge of the central Arizona. Pay was okay. I got my own little place where I was living with my girlfriend. It was all pretty good in its own right, but I wasn't making terribly much. We'd never be able to take a vacation or do anything on our own. It was on a Wednesday when I saw an ad in the city newspaper for a pool boy in a little place a few miles out of town for almost twice what I was making, doing all the other maintenance work I already was. I almost immediately called the number on the paper, mentioned, and was greeted by a calm sounding man, probably in his mid 40s. When I inquired about the job, he seemed to become even happier and was already setting up a meeting time. That Saturday we met at his place, big open house with lots of windows and all the latest appliances. He seemed to have be a pretty much nice guy too, rich too. Obviously, when I asked how much he was offering just to monitor his pool, he replied that he had just let his last guy to go and his pool always needed surveillance because he had a younger daughter who had a lot of friends, that sort of thing. I accepted the job and almost instantly and was gladly up to his place after my 2 weeks notice past my dad's. Work was pretty smooth for the first few weeks. My new employer was being much more understanding the circumstances than my old man was allowed to be. Due to the rules and regulations that every employee has to follow at its complex, I could go in and cool off when it seemed too hot outside. He always kept the fridge stocked with water. It all seemed exceedingly comfortable. I would occasionally make small talk with the maid. She couldn't speak English very well, but one day when I asked her, she told me that her boss was a cosmetic surgeon, obviously a very wealthy one at that. A very personal rule, I am gently against this kind of stuff and admittedly grimace at the prospect of working for someone whose money came from jobs. Still, he seemed like a very nice guy. Settled in family man, the pay was good, so I let it be. About 2 months as I was clearing some sand and other sorts of residue from the bottom of the pool, faintly hearing the sound of a piano inside. The doc's window was wide open, and he was overseeing his daughter practicing. I tried not to snoop, but the work was taking a lot longer than expected, and the music was pleasant, until suddenly stopped. I could hear the doc calmly explaining to the daughter what she did wrong, but in an instant, she was screaming at him that she wanted him to stop. It hadn't occurred to me until now that she'd been playing the entire morning. This in mind, I couldn't help but listen, just a little over the sound of the pool of my vacuum. He started shouting and threatening to ground her, to take her dolls away. I caught something that didn't understand. Something about her big Barbie or something like that. When I began to hear the music again, I went back to cleaning out the pool, trying to forget about what I just heard. Although I did try to make good on his attempt, I decided that I'd be on watch for this kind of thing in the future. I know parents snap at their children and all, but this has turned into abuse. Someone was going to hear about it. Sometime after, I was inside getting a drink when I got a good look at the photo at the refrigerator I had not noticed before. Knowing the doctor, his daughter and two other women, one in her 40s or 50s and the other a teenager. Judging by the doc's youngest daughter, it looked fairly recent. I then asked the maid about it, and that was their best broken English she could give me. She said the older woman was the doctor's wife, the younger is his older daughter. I hated to keep asking questions, given the difficulty speaking to me, but I pressed on a little more to ask why I never saw them around. Now with difficulty, not only speaking but recalling, she told me that the doctor's daughter was killed in a car crash a year ago. His wife had killed herself shortly after. This shocked and horrified me, and suddenly I couldn't help but feel a new sense of compassion for the doctor and his daughter. As I was hydrated, I went back right to work, wondering if I ever so much as a sign of grief from the two. Maybe that's why the doctor was uptight about some things with his daughter. Maybe that's why her clung into her toys the way she did. I cleaned out bits of Barbie toys from the pool on from what it seemed to be like a weekly basis. It was a lot to take in. Time went on and my work continued. I had never imagined doing what I did as a year-round job. I used to live in the Midwest. Pools usually close around Labor Day, but down here they were open all the time, and the doc's kid and her friends just kept coming over. One day I was doing my usual work when I noticed a large splotch at the bottom of the pool that must have been the first time. I was irritated and just accepted that normal chlorine wasn't going to do a trick. I had to shock the thing by using a form of super chlorine, several times stronger than the average stuff. I checked the doc's notes and said they need to indeed confirm that they had some stuff needed. It was kept in the basement. Seemed like an odd place, but I digress. Maybe it was to keep it out of his daughter's hands. Speaking of the doc's daughter, my eye caught her eye on a couple of her friends about to jump in the water. I had to shout at them to stop, and she threw a fit over me doing so. I figured that the splotch in the pool must be bacteria breeding ground, and was not letting the little kids get in it. I found my maid friend again, now frantic to try and make the pool clean for her boss's daughter. I asked her where the basement was. She responded with a confused look. I had tried several other phrases, my high school Spanish long lost, until she recognized the word cellar. She led me outside after I mentioned it, pointed at the dingy trap door at the ground, connected to the house right next to the hose. I had never noticed there before, and it was tightly bound with what appeared to be shiny new chains, every little dirt on them. I had to ask her how was I supposed to open it, but we both lacked the vocabulary to communicate properly. I was about to bitterly accept defeat, leave the doc a note and tell him not to worry about paying me that day until his daughter walked up to me. She said she had the key to the cellar. I was confused by this from the get-go, but even more so when she mentioned that I couldn't tell her dad if she did, but I wanted to get back to work. So I agreed to her conditions. I was in the dimly lit cellar a few minutes later when she shouted at me not to play with any of her toys. Why did she have toys down here? Was this where the dog kept her stuff when she was in trouble? Was she wasn't supposed to have the key? I fumbled around with the dark for a while, the light from outside only helping me so much. Desperately looking for a light switch, as I continued to wander around, I ultimately felt myself pushing up against something. It felt like a wall, but there was no weight behind it. Not entirely sure what I was doing. I pushed against it and suddenly toppled over to another passage. Confused and disoriented, and the growling increasingly frightened, I felt around for the switch again, and quickly found someone on the wall. Despite the short time I had spent at the cellar, I was briefly blinded when a switch thing turned on. But the more so, I got a good look at the room. It was not some dingy cellar that I had walked into. The thing extended underneath the house was, filled to my shock, slight disturbance. The oversized pink and white furniture, my jaw hung agape as I was searching around, finding the fully functioning bathroom, den, everything. The rooms were much smaller than the ones upstairs, but they were still comparable to the decent hotels. Why the earth did the doctor had all of this down here? I wondered through the little more, too shocked by what seemed to be turned back. When I came back up to my bedroom, of course everything was still pink, and had a huge room even included with the closet, full of clothes. The most noticeable feature present was what appeared to be a giant cardboard box sitting in the room cellar. In sloppy handwriting, the box read, "My favorite Barbie." I didn't want to open the box. I swore to myself for dropping down and grabbing the bottom of the cardboard cube. My consciousness was screaming to me to put that thing down and find whatever I had come out here for. I couldn't even remember anymore, but I just had to know what this was all for. I wish I had never taken that job. I wish I'd never go into that cellar alone. I wish I'd never opened that fucking box. I screamed and scrambled away when I instantly saw what I saw. Standing before me was the almost exact height of was a Barbie doll. I struggled to catch my breath as I stared at that thing. I was full of doubt and mettle and had everything about this, but the likeness wasn't nearly as perfect as the dolls I had seen roaming around the house. Her eyes were still open and green. She had long blonde hair and pink lips, smiling. Still trying to take it in, I noticed the doll was didn't have any clothes. It was oversized without anything that seemed impossible to figure out what led down a patch of skin down where you guessed it would be. My heart pounded. I noticed something along the doll's neck. I slowly went behind it to take a look, seeing a large bulbous thing sticking out of its back, almost like a button. Letting the curiosity defeat me once again, I gently pressed it. "Help me!" The doll screamed in a shrill voice. I ran towards the door, not even so much as shocked by the scream as I felt. I had touched flesh. No, I thought that was impossible. This thing appeared to be a gleam of plastic a moment ago. That wasn't real. But as I continued to back away, my fears were confirmed and I could see the doll's chest expanding, contracting. The doll was breathing. The doll was real. My jaw was dropped. Tears started to swell up in my eyes. This was not happening. What the fuck was I even looking at? Struggling to accept all was before me, I darted around at that moment. I could hear footsteps over my pounding heart. There was a doctor just a few feet behind me, holding a syringe. "Well then," he muttered, "I guess you found our playroom." I gently slid a hand into my pocket, and I screamed that he'd tell me what was going on. Ensuring he couldn't see, I managed to worm out my cell phone out of my pocket. Without a hint of sadness or remorse in his voice, the doctor told his tale, chilling me to the bone as I managed to trigger the video camera on my phone. The doctor had told me that they desired the same thing any other parent does, was to have the perfect child. He told me how it would all seem to be going well with his older daughter. As she started to rebel against her teenage years, her grades started to slip in high school, and he even caught her going at it in the living room couch. He was so overwhelmed by the misbehavior that he was ready to give up on her entirely. He then told me that he was convinced that if he pampered his younger daughter, surely she would behave right. A Christmas before last year, what she wanted, she got was a big Barbie doll that could do anything, and she told it to do was play with her all the time. The doctor told me about how a month ago, and planning what he'd do, planning to pamper his own youngest and punish his older. My wife found out at one point. All the best though. I was planning on to bring some fat and collagen home from work, but I think she worked out much more smoothly. He told on how he staged the appearance of his daughter while he sedated her and put her under the knife. He had spent over a week getting everything just right before he surprised his younger daughter with the playmate she always wanted, in exchange for just being my perfect little angel. My jaw was slack, too horrified at all to move. Why was he even going on and on? Was he bragging about this disgusting accomplishment? He did talked about living off juices and pure hers he made, and how her eyes were glass and hand painted. How was he even tired just to try and leave in the originals, but she cried too much that her younger daughter pointed out that her toy didn't blink, and how she had little chips throughout her body that would give her a brutal shock if she used her vocal cords, and he didn't have to press the buttons first. "You're going to fry, you sick son of a bitch!" I shouted. "What? What the hell is going on with you?" "Well, of course I wouldn't tell you this if I was going to let you leave," he said with a smile. "I've indeed a matching Ken doll, you know." I tried to swallow, but my mouth was too dry. "Now come here and take your medicine." He was unexpectedly strong, managed to tackle me quickly, knocking my phone out of my hand. The needle came deathly close, but despite me the momentary advantage, I had to wait to edge the force off of him and grab my phone. As much as I wanted to help the poor, mutilated girl, I had to save myself first. Running as fast as I can out of the basement to my car, as fast as I'd driven in my life, I pulled out of the doctor's driveway and slammed the gas. The moment I shifted into drive, about a minute later, I could hear the sound of a shotgun firing in the distance. I managed to make it back into town. Cars everywhere along before I saw everything of the doctor of my rear view. I pulled into the police station, flipped on my phone, searching for the evidence to incriminate that insane bastard, only to find that my SD card had been destroyed when he tackled me, and I had nothing to give to the police but my own testimony. And even in my head, I knew it was too mad to be true. I drove to my parents' place that night, and the house was empty. I assumed they were gone on a date or something. I searched around my dad's room and found this revolver. I don't extremely know much about the night, but my girlfriend tells me I was extremely on edge, constantly looking out the window. 3 days after my horrifying discovery, I drove back to the house, armed and ready to pay the doctor back for his crime against humanity. When I arrived, however, the house was entirely abandoned. No sign of anyone anywhere. I even checked the horrors of the cellar. The doll, the box, it was gone. I found one of the doctor's business cards while snooping to make a call to his office that night. The receptionist said he had left on a very short notice with no real explanation. This was about a year ago. I don't know how many sleepless nights with what I just had experienced with that basement. I am only mentioning this now because on Yahoo.com's newsfeed, I found an article about a pool boy in Southern Florida mysteriously disappearing. In a video that's attached were the tearful testimonies from his family and employer, speaking all the while with his daughter in an audible range, bragging her friends that she was getting a Ken doll for her favorite, Barbie.